Maria Petrov stood in the cold basement of the abandoned warehouse, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The concrete walls around her were stained with years of neglect, and the single flickering bulb overhead cast eerie shadows across her face. She was 23 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. The resistance leader, Victor, handed her a small pistol. The metal felt cold and heavy in her palm. She examined it carefully, checking the chamber and testing the trigger mechanism. Something was wrong. The firing pin had been deliberately damaged and the barrel was slightly bent. This weapon would never fire a single shot. "This gun is broken," Maria said, looking up at Victor with confusion. Victor's weathered face remained expressionless. "That's all we have left," he replied curtly. "The Germans raided our weapons cache yesterday. 3 of our best men are dead, and this is what remains of our arsenal." Maria knew this was a lie. She had seen Victor speaking in hushed tones with some of the other resistance members earlier that day. There had been suspicious glances in her direction, and conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. The truth was becoming clear. They didn't trust her completely. The mission was simple in concept but deadly in execution. Commander Hans Muller, a high-ranking Nazi officer, would be attending a dinner party at the mayor's mansion tomorrow evening. Muller was responsible for the brutal execution of over 200 civilians in their small Polish town. He had also ordered the destruction of the local synagogue and the deportation of hundreds of Jewish families to concentration camps. Maria's job was to infiltrate the party as a waitress and eliminate Muller. The resistance had spent weeks planning this operation. They had obtained servant uniforms, studied the mansion's layout, and bribed one of the kitchen staff to create an opening for Maria to slip inside undetected. "You'll have one chance," Victor explained, spreading a hand-drawn map of the mansion across the wooden table. "Muller always sits at the head table, closest to the kitchen entrance. The windows are heavily guarded and there are soldiers stationed at every exit. Once you make your move, there will be no escape route." Maria studied the map carefully, memorizing every detail. She had grown up in this town, playing in the streets that were now patrolled by German soldiers. Her father had been a blacksmith and her mother taught at the local school before it was closed down. Both of her parents had been killed in one of Muller's brutal raids 6 months earlier. The other resistance members watched her silently. There was Pavel, a former police officer who had joined the resistance after refusing to collaborate with the Nazis. Next to him stood Anna, a nurse who smuggled medical supplies to Jewish families hiding in the forests. Each of them had lost someone to Muller's cruelty. "Why are you giving me a broken weapon?" Maria asked directly, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Victor exchanged glances with the others before answering. "There are rumors that someone in our group is feeding information to the Germans. Until we know who, we can't take any chances." The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. In the world of the resistance, suspicion was often enough to get someone killed. Maria understood their caution, but it also meant she was walking into an impossible situation with no real weapon and no backup plan. "If you suspect me, why send me on this mission at all?" she asked. "Because you're the only one who can get close enough to Muller." Anna spoke up for the first time. "You match the description of the girl who was supposed to work at the dinner party. The real waitress disappeared 3 days ago. We assume the Germans took her." Maria nodded slowly. She had volunteered for this mission knowing it was likely a suicide operation. The chance to avenge her parents' deaths was worth any risk. But going in with a useless weapon changed everything. "I'll need something else then," she said, placing the broken pistol back on the table. "A knife, poison, anything that actually works." Victor shook his head. "Too risky. If you're caught with a weapon before you reach Muller, the entire operation fails. The broken gun is just for show. In case you're searched, they'll find it and think they've disarmed you." "Then how exactly am I supposed to kill him?" Maria's frustration was beginning to show. "You'll have to improvise," Pavel said grimly. "Use whatever you can find in the mansion. Kitchen knives, a letter opener, even a heavy candlestick. The element of surprise is your only real weapon." Maria realized they were sending her to die. Whether they suspected her of being a traitor or simply saw her as expendable, the result was the same. But she also understood something else. This might be her only chance to make Muller pay for what he had done to her family and her town. She spent the rest of the evening studying the mansion's layout and reviewing the dinner party's schedule. The event would begin at 7 o'clock with cocktails served in the main salon. Dinner would be served at 8:30 in the grand dining room. Muller was known to be punctual and would likely arrive exactly on time. The plan required Maria to enter through the servants' entrance at 6:30, change into her waitress uniform, and blend in with the other staff. She would serve during the cocktail hour, observe Muller's movements, and wait for the right moment to strike during dinner when the lights would be dimmed and attention focused on the entertainment. As the meeting broke up, Victor pulled Maria aside. "If you're truly one of us," he said quietly, "you'll find a way to complete this mission. If you're working for the Germans, then you'll get what you deserve." Maria looked him straight in the eye. "I'll kill Muller," she said simply, "with or without your help." Walking home through the dark streets, Maria knew this would likely be her last night alive. But she also knew that she had found her purpose. The broken gun they had given her was just another obstacle to overcome. Tomorrow she would prove that determination and courage could be more powerful than any weapon. The next morning arrived gray and cold, with frost covering the broken windows of Maria's small apartment. She had barely slept, her mind racing through every possible scenario for the evening ahead. The broken pistol lay on her nightstand, a constant reminder of the impossible task she faced. Maria dressed carefully in her best clothes, a simple blue dress that her mother had sewn for her 18th birthday. She wanted to look respectable when she arrived at the mansion, nothing that would draw unwanted attention from the guards. Her hands shook slightly as she brushed her hair, but her resolve remained firm. At noon, she walked across town to the marketplace, following the same route she had taken countless times as a child. The streets were different now. German soldiers patrolled in pairs, their heavy boots echoing off the cobblestones. Shop windows that once displayed colorful goods were now boarded up or broken. The few people who ventured outside moved quickly, keeping their eyes down. Maria stopped at the flower vendor's stall, where an elderly woman named Mrs. Kowalski sold whatever blooms she could grow in her small garden. The woman had been a friend of Maria's mother, and they had maintained a careful friendship despite the dangers. "Good afternoon, dear," Mrs. Kowalski said softly, wrapping a small bouquet of white roses in brown paper. "These are for your mother's grave?" "Yes," Maria replied, though they both knew this was code. The flowers would be left at a specific location to signal that the mission was proceeding as planned. Mrs. Kowalski leaned closer, pretending to adjust the flowers. "There's been talk among the Germans," she whispered. "They know something is planned for tonight. Extra guards have been posted around the mansion." Maria's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for telling me. Be careful, child. Your mother would want you to survive this war." Maria paid for the flowers and continued through the town, eventually reaching the old cemetery where her parents were buried. She knelt beside their graves, placing the white roses between the two simple wooden crosses. The ground was hard with frost and dead leaves scattered in the wind. "I'm going to make them pay," she whispered to the graves. "I promise you both." As afternoon turned to evening, Maria made her way to the mansion district. The mayor's house was a grand 3-story building with tall windows and ornate balconies. German military vehicles were parked along the street, and soldiers stood at regular intervals around the property. Maria approached the servants' entrance as planned, carrying a small bag with her waitress uniform. A German guard stopped her, demanding to see her identification papers. The documents had been forged by the resistance, identifying her as Anna Nowak, a local girl hired for the evening service. The guard studied the papers carefully, then searched her bag. He found the broken pistol almost immediately. Maria's heart pounded as he examined the weapon, checking the chamber and testing the trigger. "This gun doesn't work," he said in heavily accented Polish. "I know," Maria replied, trying to sound nervous but honest. "It was my father's. I carry it because it makes me feel safer walking alone at night, but I've never been able to afford bullets or repairs." The guard laughed harshly. "Stupid girl. This would be more dangerous to you than to anyone else." He handed the gun back to her. "Leave it in your bag and don't touch it again tonight." Maria was escorted to the kitchen, where she quickly changed into the black dress and white apron of the serving staff. The head butler, a nervous Polish man named Tomasz, briefed her on the evening's procedures. She would serve drinks during the cocktail hour, then help serve dinner in the main dining room. Keep your head down and your mouth shut, Tomasz warned. The Germans are in a dangerous mood tonight. Commander Muller especially. He executed 2 prisoners this morning for attempting to escape. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. Maria watched through the kitchen doorway as Nazi officers in crisp uniforms entered the mansion, accompanied by their wives and local collaborators. The sound of German conversations and laughter filled the air, making Maria's stomach turn. Commander Muller arrived precisely at 7:15. He was a tall, thin man in his 40s with cold blue eyes and graying hair slicked back with pomade. He wore a black SS uniform decorated with various medals and insignia. Maria recognized him immediately from the wanted posters the resistance had shown her. As she served champagne during the cocktail hour, Maria studied Muller's habits and movements. He stayed close to a group of senior officers, rarely venturing far from the main group. 2 bodyguards flanked him at all times, and he seemed constantly alert, his eyes scanning the room for potential threats. Maria noticed something else troubling. Several of the German officers kept glancing in her direction. Their looks were not casual. They seemed to be studying her specifically. Her fears about the mission being compromised were proving justified. During a brief break in service, Maria overheard a conversation between 2 German officers near the kitchen door. They were speaking in German, but Maria had learned enough of the language from her resistance contacts to understand the basics. "The girl matches the description," one officer said. "Are you certain this is her?" "As certain as we can be without confirming her identity directly," the other replied. "Muller wants to see how this plays out before we make our move." Maria's blood ran cold. They knew who she was, or at least suspected. The mission had been compromised from the beginning. She was walking into a trap, and Muller was using himself as bait to catch her. The realization changed everything. If the Germans knew about the assassination attempt, they would be ready for any conventional attack. The broken gun suddenly seemed less like a betrayal by her resistance comrades and more like an unintended blessing. They would be expecting her to use a firearm, not some improvised weapon. As dinner service began, Maria forced herself to remain calm and continue with her duties. She served soup and bread to the guests, always staying alert for an opportunity to get close to Muller. The dining room was elegant with crystal chandeliers, fine china, and silver cutlery that gleamed in the candlelight. Mueller sat at the head table as predicted, but Maria noticed that his bodyguards had positioned themselves with clear views of all the serving staff. Every time she approached his section of the room, at least one guard's hand moved closer to his weapon. The trap was closing around her, but Maria was not ready to give up. If she was going to die tonight, she would take Muller with her. She just needed to find the right moment and the right weapon. The kitchen knives were too far away, and the guards would spot any obvious weapon immediately. Then Maria noticed something that gave her an idea. On the head table, directly in front of Muller, sat an ornate silver letter opener that was being used to open bottles of wine. It was thin, sharp, and positioned within reach if she could create the right distraction. As the main course was being served, Maria began formulating a desperate plan. The main course was roasted duck with potatoes and vegetables, served on the finest china the mayor owned. Maria moved carefully between the tables, her eyes constantly returning to the silver letter opener near Muller's place setting. The weapon was elegant but deadly, about 8 inches long with a sharp pointed tip that could easily pierce flesh. As she served wine to the guests at Muller's table, Maria listened to their conversation. The Nazi officers were discussing their recent operations with casual brutality that made her stomach churn. Muller himself was describing the morning's executions with the same tone others might use to discuss the weather. The 2 prisoners thought they could escape by hiding in a grain cart, Muller said, cutting into his duck. "We made sure their deaths served as an example to the others. Nothing motivates compliance like a public hanging." The other officers laughed appreciatively. Maria gripped the wine bottle tighter, fighting the urge to smash it over Muller's head immediately. But such an impulsive attack would only get her killed without accomplishing her mission. One of Muller's bodyguards, a burly sergeant named Klaus, suddenly stood up and walked toward the kitchen. Maria's heart raced. Had they decided to arrest her now? But Klaus simply spoke briefly with Tomasz the butler, then returned to his position. "Sir," Klaus whispered to Muller, "the kitchen staff checks out clean. No weapons except for some old hunting rifles in the butler's office, all unloaded. Mueller nodded and continued eating. Good, but maintain surveillance on the girl. Something about her seems familiar. Maria pretended not to hear this exchange, but she knew her time was running out. They were growing more suspicious by the minute. She needed to act soon, before they decided to question her directly. The opportunity came during the dessert course. As Maria approached Muller's table with a tray of pastries, one of the German officers at a nearby table suddenly stood up and knocked over his wineglass. The red liquid splashed across the white tablecloth and onto the floor. "Mein Gott," the officer exclaimed, drawing everyone's attention to the mess. In the confusion that followed, Maria moved quickly. She set down her tray and reached for the letter opener, palming it smoothly while appearing to help clean up the spilled wine. The silver felt warm in her hand and she slipped it carefully up her sleeve. "So clumsy of me," the officer continued, making an elaborate show of apologizing to his companions. Maria suddenly realized this was no accident. The officer who had spilled the wine was Pavel from the Resistance, disguised in a German uniform. He had infiltrated the dinner party and created the distraction she needed. The Resistance hadn't abandoned her after all. As servants rushed to clean up the wine, Maria caught Pavel's eye for just a moment. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod, then returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. But Maria knew this meant the Resistance had a backup plan in motion. Mueller, however, was not fooled by the distraction. His cold blue eyes remained fixed on Maria as she moved around his table. "You," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation. "Come here." Maria had no choice but to approach. Every muscle in her body was tense, and the letter opener felt like it was burning against her forearm. The entire dining room seemed to fall silent as Mueller studied her face. "What is your name?" he asked in heavily accented Polish. "Anna Nowak, sir," Maria replied, keeping her voice steady. "Anna Nowak," Mueller repeated slowly. "And where do you live, Anna?" "On Warszawska Street, sir." "Number 43, Mueller's eyes narrowed. "Interesting, because the real Anna Nowak was found dead in her apartment 3 days ago. She had been tortured before her death, probably by resistance fighters who needed her identity." The room erupted in sudden movement. German soldiers began drawing their weapons, and the guests pushed back from their tables in alarm. Maria knew she had perhaps 3 seconds before they overwhelmed her completely. But instead of panic, Maria felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had known this moment would come. Everything she had endured, her parents' deaths, the months of living in fear, the broken promises and betrayals, had led to this single instant. "You're right," she said quietly, letting her false accent drop. "I'm not Anna Nowak." Mueller smiled coldly and began to stand. "Then who?" Maria moved with lightning speed. The letter opener slid from her sleeve into her hand, and she lunged forward before anyone could react. But instead of striking at Mueller directly, she grabbed the massive crystal chandelier chain that hung directly above the head table. The letter opener pierced through the chain's weak link with a sharp crack. The enormous chandelier, which weighed over 200 pounds, came crashing down directly onto the head table. Mueller threw himself backward, but not quickly enough. The crystal and metal structure caught him across the chest and shoulder, pinning him to the floor under hundreds of pounds of broken glass and twisted metal. His screams filled the dining room as blood pooled beneath the wreckage. Chaos erupted throughout the mansion. German soldiers were shooting wildly, trying to hit Maria while avoiding their own officers. Guests were screaming and diving for cover behind overturned tables. Several resistance fighters, disguised as servants and guests, revealed themselves and began engaging the German forces. Maria rolled behind the head table as bullets shattered the fine china and splintered the wooden chairs around her. She could hear Mueller groaning beneath the chandelier, still alive but badly injured. The letter opener was still in her hand, and she knew what she had to do. Crawling through the broken glass and debris, Maria reached Mueller's position. His face was pale and blood trickled from a deep gash across his forehead. The chandelier had crushed his right arm and several ribs, but he was conscious and trying to reach for his sidearm with his left hand. "You," he gasped when he saw her. "You're Maria Petrov. We've been hunting you for months." "I know," Maria replied calmly. She raised the letter opener above her head. Mueller's eyes widened with fear and hatred. "You think killing me will change anything? There are hundreds more like me. The Reich will—" Maria drove the letter opener down with all her strength, piercing Mueller's heart. His words were cut short as his body went rigid, then still. The man responsible for so much death and suffering in her town was finally dead. But Maria's victory was short-lived. German reinforcements were pouring into the mansion, and the resistance fighters were being overwhelmed. She could hear Pavel shouting orders somewhere in the chaos, but she couldn't see him through the smoke and confusion. A bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the destroyed remains of the head table. Blood ran down her arm, but the wound wasn't serious. More concerning was the circle of German soldiers now surrounding her position, their rifles trained on her from multiple angles. "Surrender now," one of them shouted in German. "You're completely surrounded." Maria looked down at Muller's lifeless body, then at the letter opener still clutched in her bloody hand. She had accomplished her mission, but she was about to pay the ultimate price for her revenge. The German soldiers closed in on Maria's position, their rifles pointed directly at her heart. She crouched behind the wreckage of the chandelier, Muller's blood still warm on her hands. The letter opener felt slippery in her grip, but she refused to drop it. If she was going to die, she would die fighting. "Come out slowly with your hands visible," the German sergeant barked. "Any sudden movement and we shoot." Maria could hear the battle raging throughout the mansion. Gunfire echoed from multiple rooms and smoke was beginning to fill the air. The resistance fighters had turned the elegant dinner party into a war zone, but they were clearly outnumbered. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the building's foundation. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the dining room into darkness except for the flames that had begun to spread from overturned candles. In the confusion, Maria heard Pavel's voice shouting from somewhere near the kitchen. "Maria, the wine cellar now." She didn't hesitate. Using the darkness as cover, Maria crawled rapidly across the floor, dodging between overturned chairs and avoiding the German soldiers who were now firing blindly into the shadows. Glass crunched under her knees and she could feel small cuts opening on her hands and legs. Another explosion shook the mansion, this one closer to the dining room. Maria realized the resistance had brought explosives to the operation. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a full-scale raid designed to destroy the German command structure in the region. She reached the kitchen door just as German reinforcements burst through the main entrance. Their flashlights cut through the smoke, searching for targets. Maria slipped through the doorway and found Pavel waiting for her, his stolen German uniform torn and bloodied. "Is Muller dead?" he asked urgently. "Yes." The letter opener went straight through his heart. Pavel's grim expression showed no satisfaction, only determination. "Good, but now we need to get out of here alive. The Germans have surrounded the entire building." He led her through the kitchen to a hidden panel behind the wine storage racks. The entrance was so well concealed that Maria would never have found it on her own. Beyond the panel lay a narrow stone staircase leading down into darkness. "This tunnel connects to the old monastery cellars," Pavel explained as they descended. "The resistance has been using it to move supplies and people for months." The underground passage was cramped and damp, with water dripping from the stone ceiling. They moved as quickly as possible, guided only by Pavel's small flashlight. Behind them, the sounds of battle were growing fainter, but Maria could still hear German voices shouting orders and the crack of rifle fire. "How many resistance fighters were in the mansion?" Maria asked as they hurried through the tunnel. 12, including us," Pavel replied. "Anna made it to the stables and is helping coordinate our escape routes. Victor and 3 others are holding the main staircase to buy us time." Maria felt a pang of guilt. Men and women were dying to ensure her escape, all because she had volunteered for what was supposed to be a suicide mission. The broken gun the resistance had given her seemed like a cruel joke now. She had managed to kill Muller with a dinner utensil while causing a battle that would cost dozens of lives. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Maria could see faint light ahead. They emerged through another hidden panel into the basement of an abandoned bakery 3 blocks from the mansion. The building had been closed since the German occupation began, and its windows were boarded up from the inside. Pavel immediately went to work on a radio set hidden behind sacks of moldy flour. After a few moments of static, he made contact with the resistance command post. "Hawk's Nest, this is Pavel. The bird has flown, repeat, the bird has flown. Request immediate extraction for 2 personnel. The voice that answered was tense but relieved. "Pavel, this is Victor. Confirmed on primary objective. Secondary team is moving to extraction point Beta. You have 15 minutes before German patrols reach your sector." Maria slumped against the basement wall, exhaustion and shock finally catching up with her. She looked down at her hands, still stained with Muller's blood, and tried to process what had just happened. She had accomplished the impossible, killing one of the most heavily guarded Nazi commanders in the region with nothing more than a piece of silverware. "You did something incredible tonight," Pavel said, turning away from the radio. "Muller's death will inspire people throughout the region. It proves the Germans aren't invincible." "How many of our people died because of my mission?" Maria asked quietly. Pavel's expression darkened. "That's not how you should think about it. Those people chose to fight. They died fighting against evil, which is better than living under it." Before Maria could respond, they heard the sound of vehicles approaching outside. Pavel quickly switched off the radio and grabbed a rifle from behind the flour sacks. He handed Maria a pistol. This one was clearly functional, unlike the broken weapon from the previous night. "German patrol," he whispered, moving toward the boarded windows. "They're doing a house-to-house search." Through gaps in the boards, Maria could see flashlight beams moving across the street. German soldiers were methodically checking every building in the area, kicking down doors and searching cellars. It was only a matter of minutes before they reached the bakery. "Is there another way out?" Maria asked. Pavel shook his head. "This was supposed to be a safe house, but they're moving faster than we expected. We'll have to fight our way out." The footsteps stopped directly outside the bakery's front door. Maria heard German voices discussing whether the building was worth searching. Her heart pounded as she realized their fate hung on the decision of tired soldiers, who might decide to skip one more empty building. The decision went against them. Heavy boots kicked at the front door, and wood splintered as the Germans forced their way inside. Pavel motioned for Maria to take cover behind the flour sacks while he positioned himself near the basement stairs. "Search every room," a German officer commanded from above. "The terrorists can't have gone far." Footsteps moved across the floor above their heads, accompanied by the sounds of furniture being overturned and walls being knocked on to check for hollow spaces. It was systematic and thorough. They would find the basement entrance within minutes. Maria checked her pistol's ammunition and found it fully loaded with 8 rounds. Not many bullets for what was likely to be their final battle, but enough to take several Germans with them. She thought about her parents' graves and wondered if she would be buried beside them, or if her body would simply disappear into one of the German mass graves. The basement door creaked open, and a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Hier unten," a German voice called. "There's a basement." Pavel raised his rifle and took aim at the stairway. Maria moved to a position where she could cover the other side of the basement. Whatever happened next, they would not surrender. Muller was dead, and that victory was worth any price they might have to pay. Heavy boots began descending the wooden steps, one careful step at a time. The first German soldier appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his rifle sweeping the basement methodically. Pavel held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The soldier's flashlight beam passed dangerously close to Maria's hiding spot behind the flour sacks. Just as Pavel was about to fire, a tremendous explosion erupted from the direction of the mansion. The blast was so powerful that it shook the entire neighborhood, causing dust to rain down from the bakery's ceiling and making the German soldier stumble on the stairs. "Was zum Teufel?" the soldier muttered, turning his attention back toward the stairway. In that moment of distraction, Pavel fired. The shot echoed through the basement like thunder, and the German soldier collapsed backward onto the stairs. His flashlight rolled across the floor, casting wild shadows on the walls. "Hans! Hans, report!" Voices shouted from above. Pavel quickly gestured for Maria to move toward the hidden tunnel entrance. They had perhaps 30 seconds before more German soldiers descended into the basement. As they reached the panel, Maria could hear heavy footsteps pounding across the floor above and German voices shouting orders. "Go. Go," Pavel whispered urgently, pushing her toward the tunnel. But as Maria opened the hidden panel, she froze. The tunnel was already occupied. 3 German soldiers were emerging from the other end, having discovered the underground passage during their search of the monastery ruins. They were trapped between 2 groups of enemy forces with nowhere left to run. "Drop your weapons," one of the Germans from the tunnel commanded in accented Polish. "You are completely surrounded." Pavel looked at Maria, his eyes filled with determination rather than despair. "Remember what we talked about," he said quietly. "Some things are worth dying for." Instead of surrendering, Pavel suddenly charged toward the tunnel entrance, firing rapidly at the German soldiers. His desperate attack caught them off guard, and 2 of the soldiers fell before they could return fire effectively. But the 3rd soldier's bullet found its mark, striking Pavel in the chest and spinning him around. Maria caught Pavel as he fell, his blood spreading across her already stained dress. The German soldier who had shot him was reloading his rifle, preparing to finish them both. Without thinking, Maria raised her pistol and fired twice. Both shots hit their target and the soldier crumpled to the tunnel floor. "Pavel, stay with me," Maria whispered. But she could see that his wound was fatal. Blood was spreading rapidly across his shirt and his breathing was becoming shallow. "The mission," he gasped. "Tell them." "We succeeded." More German soldiers were descending the basement stairs, their voices growing louder and more urgent. Maria knew she had only moments before they reached her position. Pavel's sacrifice had given her a chance. But she was still trapped with limited ammunition and no clear escape route. Then Maria heard something that changed everything. Resistance fighters calling her name from somewhere beyond the tunnel. Victor's voice echoed through the underground passage, followed by the distinctive crack of rifles firing at the Germans. "Maria, this way, we're coming for you!" The resistance had launched a rescue operation, using the same tunnel system to reach her location. The sound of battle was now coming from both ends of the basement, as resistance fighters engaged the German soldiers from multiple directions. Maria pressed Pavel's hand one final time, then began moving through the tunnel toward Victor's voice. The confined space amplified every gunshot and shout, creating a deafening echo that made it difficult to determine exactly what was happening. As she crawled through the narrow passage, Maria passed the bodies of the German soldiers Pavel had killed. His final charge had been suicidal, but it had opened the escape route she needed. The weight of his sacrifice would stay with her for the rest of her life. The tunnel began to widen, and Maria could see muzzle flashes ahead. A fierce firefight was taking place in what appeared to be a larger underground chamber. She could hear Victor shouting orders to his men, coordinating their attack on the German forces that had followed her into the tunnels. "Victor!" Maria called out as she reached the chamber. "I'm here. Thank God," Victor replied, not taking his eyes off the tunnel entrance he was guarding. "Pavel?" "Dead. He saved my life." Victor's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded. There would be time to mourn later. "We need to move. The Germans are bringing in reinforcements, and they know about the tunnel system now." The resistance fighters had formed a defensive perimeter around several tunnel entrances, but they were clearly outnumbered. Maria could count at least 15 German soldiers moving through the underground passages, and more were likely coming. Anna appeared at Maria's side, her nurse's uniform replaced by dark clothes and a rifle. "Is it true? Is Muller really dead?" "Yes, I killed him with a letter opener." Anna's smile was fierce with satisfaction. "Good. That butcher deserved worse." A German grenade exploded somewhere in the tunnel system and the chamber filled with choking dust and smoke. Several resistance fighters were wounded by flying debris, and Maria could see that their defensive position was becoming untenable. "We can't hold them much longer," Victor announced. "Everyone to the emergency exit, move." The resistance fighters began a fighting retreat through another tunnel that Maria hadn't seen before. They carried their wounded comrades and continued firing at the German soldiers who pursued them. The underground battle had become a running fight through a maze of stone passages that connected various buildings throughout the old quarter of town. Maria found herself running beside Anna through a tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever. Behind them, the sounds of gunfire were gradually fading as the distance increased. Her shoulder wound had reopened during the fighting and blood was soaking through her torn dress. "Where does this tunnel lead?" Maria asked as they ran. "The old church," Anna replied breathlessly. "There's a resistance safe house in the bell tower." After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged through a hidden entrance beneath the altar of the town's oldest church. The building had been damaged during the early days of the German occupation, but the bell tower remained intact. Victor was the last to emerge from the tunnels, and he immediately began checking on his fighters. 3 men had been killed during the escape, and several others were wounded. Pavel's death brought the total resistance casualties to 4, a heavy price for the mission. But as dawn broke over the town, Maria could see that their sacrifice had accomplished something significant. Smoke was still rising from multiple buildings in the government district, and the sound of German sirens filled the air. The resistance attack had done far more damage than just killing Muller. What happens now? Maria asked Victor as they climbed to the bell tower's upper level. Now we disappear for a while, Victor replied. The Germans will be conducting massive reprisals for the next few weeks. But word of Muller's death will spread throughout the region. Other resistance groups will be inspired to take action. Maria looked out through the bell tower's window at her hometown below. German soldiers were moving through the streets in large patrols, but she could also see signs of hope. A few people were watching from their windows with expressions that showed more defiance than fear. The news of Muller's death was already beginning to spread. The broken gun they had given her seemed like a lifetime ago. She had accomplished the impossible using nothing but determination, courage, and an ornate piece of silverware. More importantly, she had proven that even the most powerful Nazi commanders were not untouchable. Pavel's sacrifice, and the deaths of the other resistance fighters, had purchased something precious: hope for the future and proof that the German occupation could be resisted successfully. 3 weeks after Muller's death, Maria sat in the bell tower watching German soldiers conduct their daily patrols through the town square. The reprisals had been brutal, just as Victor had predicted. Over 50 civilians had been executed in public as punishment for the resistance attack, and the entire population was under strict curfew from sunset to sunrise. But something fundamental had changed in the town's atmosphere. The people who gathered in the square during permitted hours no longer moved with the broken shuffle of complete defeat. There was a subtle difference in how they held their heads, a quiet defiance in their eyes that hadn't been there before Muller's reign of terror. Maria's shoulder wound had healed, leaving only a small scar as a reminder of that night. She had cut her hair short and dyed it a different color, part of the new identity the resistance had created for her. Officially, Maria Petrov had died in the mansion attack. Her body was never found, leading the Germans to assume she had been killed in the explosions. Her new name was Katya Kowalski, and she was supposedly the niece of the flower vendor who had helped her before the mission. The old woman had welcomed her with genuine warmth, understanding the importance of protecting resistance fighters. Living above the flower shop gave Maria a perfect cover and an excellent vantage point for observing German activities. Victor had been right about the mission's impact beyond their small town. Reports were filtering in from across the region about increased resistance activity. Muller's death had demonstrated that even high-ranking Nazi officers could be eliminated, inspiring other groups to attempt similar operations. The German response had been predictably harsh. They had brought in a new commander, Colonel Brenner, who was reportedly even more ruthless than Muller. Additional troops had been stationed throughout the region, and new security measures made it much more difficult for resistance fighters to operate. But Maria had also noticed signs that the German occupation was beginning to strain under the pressure of increased resistance activity. Supply convoys required larger escorts, military personnel seemed more nervous and jumpy, and there were rumors of German defeats on distant fronts that were undermining morale. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the shop window, Maria noticed a familiar face among the people crossing the square. It was Anna, disguised as a market vendor selling vegetables from a small cart. She made eye contact with Maria briefly, then nodded toward the old cemetery, their established signal for an emergency meeting. That evening, Maria slipped out of the flower shop through the back entrance and made her way carefully through the narrow alleyways to the cemetery. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to navigate between the headstones without using a flashlight that might attract German patrols. Anna was waiting beside Maria's parents' graves, along with Victor and 2 resistance fighters Maria didn't recognize. The white roses Maria had left weeks ago had withered and been replaced by fresh flowers, a sign that other resistance members had been visiting the site regularly. "We have a problem," Victor said without preamble. "The Germans have captured one of our couriers." Under interrogation, he revealed information about our tunnel network and safe houses. Maria felt her stomach clench. "How much does he know?" "Everything about the mansion operation," Anna replied grimly, "including your real identity and current location." The implications were clear. Maria's cover had been blown, and it was only a matter of time before German soldiers came looking for her. The resistance could try to move her to a different safe house, but their entire local network was now compromised. There's something else, Victor continued. The courier also revealed details about Operation Nightfall. Maria had heard whispers about Nightfall but didn't know the specifics. From the expressions on the other resistance fighters' faces, it was clearly something important. Nightfall is our plan to coordinate simultaneous attacks on German supply lines throughout the entire region, Victor explained. If the Germans know about it in advance, dozens of resistance cells will be walking into traps. One of the unknown resistance fighters stepped forward. That's why we need you to come with us, he said in accented Polish. Maria realized he was probably from one of the other resistance groups in the region. Come where? Maria asked. To warn the other cells and help coordinate a new plan, Anna explained. Your success against Muller has made you something of a legend among resistance fighters. People will listen to you in a way they won't listen to others. Maria looked around at the faces gathered in the moonlit cemetery. These people were asking her to abandon the relative safety of her current hiding place and travel across occupied territory to help organize resistance operations. It was essentially another suicide mission, but on a much larger scale. How long would I be gone? She asked. Permanently, Victor said bluntly. Your usefulness here is finished. The Germans will tear this town apart looking for you, and they'll execute anyone suspected of helping you. The only way to protect the people here is for you to disappear completely. Maria walked over to her parents' graves and knelt down, touching the simple wooden crosses. She had accomplished what she set out to do. Muller was dead, and his death had inspired others to fight back against the German occupation. But the price of that success was that she could never again live a normal life in the place where she had grown up. If I go with you, she said finally, what exactly would I be doing? The unknown resistance fighter answered. Teaching other groups what you learned from the Mansion operation, helping them plan and execute their own missions against high-value German targets. You've proven that determination and improvisation can overcome superior firepower in numbers. And eventually, Victor added, helping to coordinate a region-wide uprising when the time is right. The war is turning against the Germans, but it will take coordinated resistance efforts to drive them out completely. Maria stood up and brushed the dirt from her knees. The choice was really no choice at all. Staying in town would endanger everyone who had helped her, while leaving offered the possibility of striking even more devastating blows against the German occupation. When do we leave? She asked. Tonight, Anna replied. A truck will pick you up behind the church in 2 hours. From there, you'll travel to the forest camps where the regional resistance is coordinating operations. As the meeting broke up, Victor approached Maria privately. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. The broken gun wasn't because we suspected you of being a traitor. It was because we expected you to die in the mission and we didn't want to waste a working weapon. Maria smiled grimly. I know, but in a strange way that broken gun saved my life. It forced me to think creatively instead of relying on conventional weapons. The letter opener that killed Muller is already becoming a symbol among resistance fighters, Victor continued. They're calling it proof that the pen is indeed mightier than the sword. 2 hours later, Maria was riding in the back of a farmer's truck through the darkened countryside, leaving behind everything she had ever known. The town where she had grown up, where her parents were buried, and where she had taken her first steps toward becoming a resistance fighter was disappearing behind her. But as the truck carried her toward an uncertain future, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced since her parents' death. Hope. Muller's elimination had been just the beginning. The broken gun they had handed her had led to something far more powerful than any weapon, the knowledge that even the most impossible missions could succeed with enough determination and courage. The war was far from over, but the resistance was growing stronger every day. And Maria Petrov, the girl who had killed a Nazi commander with a dinner utensil, was about to help turn that resistance into a force capable of driving out the German occupation entirely.